So more previews of Final Fantasy 16 have released, and this is the second time Square Enix has let the media do like a preview event with some of the gameplay and combat and stuff like that. We also had a 20-minute PlayStation showcase, and we had an hour-long like video presentation at PAX East of Final Fantasy 16. So this is showing me one thing and one big thing, and it's the fact that Square Enix is very confident in Final Fantasy 16 as a game, which gets me very excited. They said that there's going to be no day one patch, that it's all going to be pretty much ready to go on the disc on day one, and that is so rare in today's world. And I know a lot of people, especially people that are like longtime Final Fantasy fans, are very pessimistic with the franchise currently. Some of us can argue back and forth as far as like when we had a last good game. There's definitely a lot of controversy between Final Fantasy 15. Personally, I like Final Fantasy 15, but definitely Final Fantasy 13 was when I pretty much fell off of Final Fantasy. But I always kind of go into it with benefit of the doubt, knowing that not every franchise is going to have great games. But seeing how confident they are in Final Fantasy 16 and how much they've shown us, how much they've given us, I'm definitely in the mindset that this is going to be a very top tier game. Now, whether or not you're a fan of Final Fantasy, you have to admit that when Final Fantasy delivers, it delivers on all fronts. It's usually a graphical showcase. The story is phenomenal, characters, gameplay. When Final Fantasy is done right, it is done very, very right. And I do believe that Nakira Yoshida and his team believe that they've developed the next building block for what Final Fantasy is going to be, and they're going to be pushing it into the next console generation. And again, very excited. This brings us to the next question. Can Final Fantasy 16 win Game of the Year? Well, you gotta ask Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Currently right now, Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is the highest rated Metacritic score of 2023. It is the highest open critic of all time. It is a phenomenal game and everyone's raving about it. The question is, can Final Fantasy 16 dethrone Tears of the Kingdom? Because right now it's Tears of the Kingdom's Game of the Year to lose at right now. Now, Tears of the Kingdom, personally to me, is a great game and I'm having tons of fun. And up to this point of the year, it is probably my favorite game that's came out this year. With that being said, for me personally, I'm looking at Final Fantasy 16 and I get so excited because when it comes to the way I like to play my games, I like really great combat systems. I like linear, very engaging stories. I like graphical showcases. These are the type of things that I love in my games. Tears of the Kingdom does not do any of these. It is not a graphical showcase. It is not a huge story-based game. Even though there is a better story than Breath of the Wild, you can argue that it's not really up to the level of some of the other Legend of Zelda stories, or even some Final Fantasy stories. It's just not really there as much. I mean, I've played 30-40 hours almost, and I'm still yet to even like touch the story really. So again, it's very different in comparison to something like Final Fantasy 16, which is going to be very combat focused, very graphically dense. It's going to be very linear and just going to be a huge contrast in the games. So I'm very curious to see how kind of not just the mainstream lands on what they believe a better game is, because typically if you look at Game of the Year's winners, they're usually like best story, best graphics, best gameplay. Now obviously I haven't played Final Fantasy 16 yet, so I can only go off of like the previews and the trailers, but just judging by how confident they are, just judging by what I've seen and what I like in games, personally, in my opinion, I feel like Final Fantasy 16 is going to be my Game of the Year. I am going into it with that bias because Final Fantasy is my favorite franchise of all time, and I don't know, it's gonna be like, even though I love Tears of the Kingdom, there's tons of room in the game that I feel can make the game better for me, and I understand that that's a me thing and not an everyone thing. Now if I'm gonna go by the mainstream, the masses, the Jeff Keighley awards, I do believe Tears of the Kingdom is gonna win it for 2023, and I feel like the precedent has been set with things like Elden Ring versus God of War, where I feel like something like Tears of the Kingdom and Elden Ring help transcend beyond gaming and reach kind of a broader audience to make it more of a kind of a spectacle, versus Final Fantasy 16 I think is going to reach to the more core, like hardcore gamers, and it's just going to be very, again, it's just very interesting. I feel like this is one of those like interesting battles between two great games that do two different things so perfectly. And I feel like the only way Final Fantasy 16 can beat Tears of the Kingdom right now is if the story is so engaging and so like a must see that it can transcend gaming at this point. That's what it needs to do. And I feel like one thing gets thrown around a lot when people talk about the story of Final Fantasy 16, those people who previewed it, media people who've seen it, is they always make direct comparisons to Game of Thrones. And I feel like if you can do that, if you can reach Game of Thrones level in your storytelling, yeah, I think you can transcend video games with just a story alone. But yeah, I think because it's so story focused, you have a lot of things working against you. Because one, people who aren't gonna like the combat system aren't gonna be as willing to even like experience the full story if they don't like the combat. Things like if your game doesn't run and sing phenomenally on the PS5, people aren't going to be as willing to play it. We saw that with like Jedi Survivor, where the game's story was phenomenal, but because a lot of the frame drops and a lot of the graphical hitches, people didn't even play the game really to experience the full story. So again, Final Fantasy 16 needs to deliver on its graphical showcase. It needs to deliver on its performance, on its story, on its characters. And that's another thing that's really hard to do, is deliver compelling characters on your first try. Legend of Zelda with Link has been running for 30 years. He's a character that a lot of people are familiar with, whether they're gamers or not. So it's easy for something like Legend of Zelda to transcend gaming with an iconic character like Link, like Zelda, like Ganon. Final Fantasy 16 has Clive. I'm gonna be honest, I do not like the name Clive. And the thing about Final Fantasy 16's Clive character has me excited to play Final Fantasy 16. The only thing I'm going into Final Fantasy 16 for is the name Final Fantasy, is the combat, is the graphical showcase, and is because I know Naoki Yoshida is phenomenal at game design based off of Final Fantasy 14. So I'm not going into this for Clive, for this world of that they made up and created that everyone's going to be hopping into for the first time. And I feel like it's just going to be a very uphill battle to sell people on a character like Clive that no one who knows who he is, on this world that no one knows. And I don't know, it's just going to be a really hard thing to do. I do think that this Game of the Year conversation at the end of the year is going to be a very interesting one. I think it's going to be a battle between tons of Goliaths. I feel like you're going to have things like Final Fantasy 16, things like Starfield coming out, Tears of the Kingdom, Spider-Man 2. I mean, there's so many games coming out this year that are so high quality and top tier and anticipated that I feel like it's anyone's Game of the Year to win. But I do feel like it is going to come down to Final Fantasy 16 and Tears of the Kingdom at the end of the day. I feel like those are the two games that are going to be the most polished and are going to deliver on what they set out to do. But, I mean, I guess we'll have to see and find out which game ends up winning. Maybe it's none of them. Maybe Armored Core wins. Who knows? It's going to be a very exciting year, and I feel like in the end of the day, all of us as gamers are the real winners because we get to experience some phenomenal games all in one year. It's just absurd. I feel like I've just been gaming nonstop back to back, and I just couldn't be any more happier. Anyway, those are my final thoughts. Let me know down below who you guys think is going to be your Game of the Year. Who you guys think is going to win Jeff Keighley's Game of the Year. If you liked the video, do me a favor and like the video, and please consider subscribing. I'll see you guys on the next video.